playing with fire, transformative fire, rising from the ashes. The fire symbol has followed Xi Jinping throughout his rise, whether he knows it or not. His growing power has caught the attention not only of the Chinese people, but also the world. Fire. In one swift motion, or several, depending on the strength and fuel applied, a flame can burst from seemingly nothing. When Xi's flames finally became visible, people took note of a similar fire that burned decades ago, that of Mao Zedong's. It was a fire that burned bright, even though it had a destructive streak. The flames not only licked but devoured so much more before it died down. Now people are wondering if Xi Jinping has the same flame. The question is not about his level of power, but about something else. Is it going to be more destructive or transformative? Some clues may be there, but his story is still being told. One may think it was easy to gain the comparison to Mao Zedong, with the Chinese Communist Party boasting more than 96 million members. But it wasn't that simple. Even with about 2 million of these names hailed as heroes and martyrs for the sake of the communist ideals, it still wasn't enough. The three leaders between Mao and Xi are proof that the comparison is not recklessly given. It isn't merely doled out based on the number of followers. It is so much more. Lest we may forget, sometimes the person may make the comparison themselves, and Xi Jinping has enough confidence in his ability to do just that. But the thing is, Xi Jinping never really was nothing, and when he rose to power, people were quick to compare him to Mao Zedong. The rising from the ashes as a phoenix comparison is born out of his early years, the ones that had him hidden from the rest of the world. Though his origins were far from humble, his family was humbled because of a couple of notable points in his history: his father's imprisonment and his exile. For years, Xi had made it seem like he was okay with being nothing, exiled to live and work in poor rural villages during the time Mao Zedong was China's ruler. Most would say that the Cultural Revolution had relegated him to a much lower position, one that wasn't expected of someone who was born a son of a senior Communist Party official. In hindsight, it wasn't like that at all. The relationship between Mao and Xi began then, a complex dance that should have ended in hate because of what happened to the latter, but somehow Xi found a way to make it work for himself. Xi Jinping was born on June 15, 1953. His father was Xi Zhongshun, who was a guerrilla commander during the Civil War that placed the Communists into power in 1949. He was born into a family of fighters, and remaining in one place wasn't and still isn't in his blood. Revolution is. By 1969, however, Xi Jinping was sent with other educated urban youths to not only live but also work within poor rural communities. It was the year after his father was sent to jail. This difficult transition happened during the social upheaval called the Cultural Revolution, which was Mao Zedong's brainchild. The experience was only meant to strengthen Xi Jinping, though it was surely more of a punishment at that time. After all, gold is tested by fire. At that time, he might not have known it yet. More likely, the people around him weren't too sure about what would happen in his future. He was just one among many privileged boys thrust into an unprivileged life because their fathers supposedly did or said the wrong things. By 1979, his path became clearer as he joined the military as an aide in the Central Military Commission and Defense Ministry. 3 years later, in 1982, he became the deputy of Zhengding County's Communist Party. He eventually became its leader during his 3-year stint there. 1979 was also the first year he got married. Unfortunately, this first marriage fell apart. During the period he was in the military, Xi was also studying chemical engineering at the top-notch Tsinghua University. It goes without saying that he was moving up, whether or not the rise was political. A lot of self-improvements were going on in that little time, and the time living and working in poor villages was starting to make sense. Politics was also becoming a clear part of his life. In 1985, he began a 17-year reign as Xiamen City's vice mayor. It wasn't the only development for him. Xi got married again in 1987 to a popular singer named Peng Liyuan. She was part of the People's Liberation Army's song and dance troupe. They eventually had a daughter together. It is believed that his rise to political power only began truly showing itself in 1996. He was still vice mayor at that time. The political climb didn't stop at Xi being vice mayor. Although the stint was so lengthy that you'd think he was content with that particular position. From 2000 to 2002, he served as Fujian province's governor, finally showing some interest in climbing further up the political ladder. In 2002, Xi was transferred to Zhejiang province. There, he rose to a higher position again by becoming appointed party chief. In China, that position outranks the governor. By March 2007, he was appointed the party chief of Shanghai. He only lasted a few months in the position. It makes sense because he jumps higher in October, joining a national leadership. It was a big deal, with him being one of 9 members of a top Communist Party group, the Politburo Standing Committee. During his early years, Xi Jinping's rise was slower. He tended to stay in one position for longer. However, as he gained momentum, his rise was more pronounced. After becoming one of 9 leaders in a Communist Party group in October 2007, he became China's vice president in March 2008. Things had been going well. By August 2011, Xi hosted US VP Joe Biden when the latter visited China. By November 2012, he went on to replace Chinese President Hu Jintao as the Communist Party's General Secretary. Taking over Hu Jintao's position seemed to be a sign. In March 2013, Xi finally became President of China, beginning his first 5-year term. Xi didn't waste time. During his first year as president, he began reclaiming land in the South China Sea. The intention was to build islands on which he could erect runways and other kinds of infrastructure. On the surface, everyone thought that Xi Jinping was the main reason China was actively asserting its territorial claims over the South China Sea. Yes, he is responsible for more assertive maritime policies, but China was already on the road to making its claims even before he became president. Xi just made it clearer. It also cannot be denied that the goal of building China into a great maritime power only made it to the 18th Party Congress in 2012 and reaffirmed in the 19th Party Congress in 2017. So, it was then that Xi was making his presence known. He wants more territory for China. China's territorial claims didn't make it popular internationally, to say the least. It's hard to tell what the Chinese people really think of China's claims on the South China Sea. After all, censorship doesn't allow strong extremist opinions against the government to surface. However, the government does weave a narrative that's meant to arouse patriotic sentiments that China has owned the territory since ancient times. China continued becoming even more controversial under Xi Jinping. In 2017, it went after the Uyghur and other Muslim ethnic groups located in Xinjiang region. This crackdown was a result of extremist attacks. While the initial intention seemed justifiable, China went under fire over accusations of genocide. It was in this year when Xi Jinping launched an ideology identified by his name as he began his second 5-year term. It was known as the Xi Jinping Thought. Clearly, it wasn't just about China anymore. It was about this particular leader and how he had been manifesting what people had been hoping for. Greater power, influence, assertion. By March 2018, it became clear what Xi wanted all along when China's legislature got rid of the 2-term limit on the presidency. By July of the same year, however, US President Donald Trump began a trade war when it imposed tariff on Chinese goods. China retaliated by doing the same for US goods. It was just the beginning of a series of issues Xi Jinping had to deal with in his leadership. People could also see that he wasn't into bowing to other countries. He maintained his policies whether people thought they were unacceptable or not. From June to November of 2019, he had to face large protests in favor of more democracy in Hong Kong. He responded by imposing draconian security measures smack in the middle of the following year. But it was also the year in which China had to lock down Wuhan as the COVID-19 pandemic swept through the city. As we already know by now, this issue has become larger than it first appeared to be, taking the world by storm. We can still feel its remnants today. What remnants, you may ask? Well, you'd see them in every person who still feels the need to wear a mask in public. You'd also see this in the way Chinese people living overseas are sometimes still regarded with suspicion. Even those who aren't even citizens but look Asian can still feel the effects of the COVID era, based on how poorly China handled it. It was an era where Xi was suspected by everyone outside of China of fabricating the numbers of the infected and the deceased. Even though COVID-19 became a looming deadly presence in China and elsewhere, causing millions of deaths, Xi had other things going on. In September 2020, he made a video speech for the UN General Assembly to express China's goal to peak carbon dioxide emissions before 2030. He said that the country was aiming for carbon neutrality before 2060. In December of the same year, authorities investigated Alibaba, checking it for monopoly as this e-commerce superpower seemed to be squashing the hopes of its potential competitors. Other issues, such as China's problematic and indebted real estate industry, had to be tackled by Xi during the next year. Still, his strategic wheels kept turning as he forged alliances with Russia when he met up with Vladimir Putin during the Beijing Winter Olympics opening. People were quick to note that when Russia invaded Ukraine a mere 3 weeks later, China didn't join in criticizing its move. Xi Jinping seemed eager to continue showing his need to gain more power and territories for China. In August of 2022, China flexed its muscles by launching missiles around Taiwan. It seemed to be more than just a coincidence that the military exercises happened after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit. By October, Xi solidified his claim for more power when he used the no-term limit policy to claim a third 5-year term as Communist Party leader. Since Mao Zedong, people had been looking for a leader who would be worthy to be his successor. So it's important that we also take a look at what made Mao great in the first place. Scholars said that under Mao Zedong, China went through leaps and bounds. The changes he had made possible would have normally taken centuries to accomplish in the West. It's a very bold statement. His rule was then called the Great Leap. China went from being a feudal society to a socialist state. Imperialist powers no longer bullied China. Instead, it became a world power with atomic bombs at its helm. It even obtained a UN Security Council seat. No wonder millions of Chinese people look up to him. After all, he was the proponent of a nationalism so strong it took out imperialism. He became the father of the People's Republic of China. Despite his controversial rule, that's something that nobody could take away from him. Just like Xi, Mao's reign might have been full of genius, but it wasn't perfect. Not by a long mile. It also made a mess of policies in important sectors such as agriculture and the economy. Mao's rule included not only the Great Leap Forward, but also the Cultural Revolution, which was violent and had caused casualties that could only be exceeded by the Second World War. Just how many casualties are we talking about here? Mao's policies caused numerous deaths, ranging from no less than 40 to 80 million victims. These victims died due to many reasons: persecution, prison labor, starvation, and even mass executions. To have a clearer perspective as to how horrific those numbers are, the deaths surpass the ones caused by either Hitler or Stalin. In the Great Leap Forward, some people didn't survive to take that leap together with the rest of China. Imagine then what being akin to Mao would be like for Xi Jinping. It meant ruthlessness to go for changes that he felt were needed by China. It meant deaths. The issues that had followed his reign so far had shown that he was certainly capable of it. But would he be like Mao in terms of the death toll? Would he be able to continue the former leader's legacy of mass murder? COVID deaths certainly didn't help Xi's credibility. In fact, it endangered it, made people think that he was, indeed, continuing on the Chinese deaths that weren't just the result of brutality, but also of incompetence. China's hubris and blind pursuit of a utopia had it installing policies that affected so many lives. Right now, people's focus is on Xi Jinping. He seems to have the hubris and the influence that Mao had. Other countries think of him as a ticking time bomb, more than they have ever regarded the other leaders that followed Mao. Going back to the COVID-19 debacle, the whole world knew that the virus originated in Wuhan. It was something that would have been traced anyway, no matter the cover-up. But Xi Jinping's China didn't treat the pandemic as a public health crisis. Instead, it was more focused on covering up issues and showcasing their superiority. The Chinese National Health Commission chose to work on its own, refusing international health organizations to investigate the origin and true nature of the virus during its early days. It even instructed its local labs to get rid of the virus' original samples. It was clear that Xi Jinping's China values saving face over saving its people. The pandemic was treated with utter recklessness. National lockdowns were implemented at some point, but with the neglect of its people. People were literally barred inside their homes. Some were left to die. These lockdowns were interspersed with moments of unwarranted lockdown lifting, when the infection couldn't be contained and was spreading at an alarming rate. The government even allowed millions to leave the country, thus causing an even deadlier chain reaction with these travelers spreading the virus. Strangely enough, domestic travel was put to a halt. Perhaps it was at this point that some people had realized just how dangerous it could be to have another Mao in Xi Jinping. While brutality might not be as apparent, incompetence for the sake of hubris certainly caused a lot of deaths. It seemed like the continuous pattern China's greats is becoming known for. Mao Zedong had beaten Stalin's and Hitler's records, but some believe that Mao could even be more dangerous. Why? How? Xi Jinping rules a more technologically advanced world. His decisions have repercussions in the free world. They can result in not only national but also global disaster. COVID-19 is proof that it can happen. So, is Xi's Mao Zedong qualities what China needs right now? Let's do another rewind. Directly after Mao, even China wanted more prosperity and stability. They got tired and wary of revolution. They didn't want an iron fist or the possibility of family members dying because of a brutal or incompetent regime. A pragmatic rule followed under Deng Xiaoping. Scholars and critics viewed Deng as a grand architect, one who was capable of moving China toward being more open to the world, and therefore more marketable. It's then understandable that some of them may be wishing that Xi would turn more into a Deng than a Mao. Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao followed, but neither of the two had ever been considered a great leader. It was only when Xi Jinping took over that China had a glimpse of another strong leader. But strong leaders can lean either way. They could be brilliant strategists who could raise their people from the ashes, or megalomaniacs who could burn them alive, literally or figuratively. The thing was that despite the fear that Mao Zedong has left in his wake, people still wanted someone strong, someone who could lead them well. With corruption rampant on every level of politics, someone should be able to come and effect a change before the regime collapses. It's why Xi Jinping continues to thrive, even though people compare him to what the world may think of as a monster. In 2012, when Xi became party leader, he faced this messed up rule. He and others who wanted to raise China from the ashes wanted a leader who could work like a patriarch, someone who cared about China but could also be strict enough to straighten it up. A decade after Xi started his anti-corruption campaign, it was still going on. Under his campaign, more than 1.5 million officials had already been punished. It was interesting and telling, though, to observe how it focused more on Xi's political rivals. So he wasn't only cracking down on corruption, but also eliminating the competition. At least he didn't have to resort to murder while doing it, and he was doing it the right way. Because of the anti-corruption campaign, Xi gained even more power. He was able to get rid of his competition and gain more support from his people. If they didn't really see him in a good light, it was time that they did. Of course, not everything was about getting rid of the competition. He was fully aware that he should continue delivering what was expected of him. Strong leadership, a healthy economy. Xi Jinping then launched the Belt and Road Initiative. This global infrastructure development strategy would have Beijing invest in almost 150 countries and projects. These projects would seem like a series of acts of goodwill, but they were also a means to create links all over the world. The phoenix that was Xi Jinping, however, was not just displaying fire for the sake of gaining power and influence. Some people forgot the fact that he did have campaigns to alleviate the poverty problem in China. In about a decade of his rule, he was able to raise about 60 million people from extreme poverty. Those who were aware of this feat placed him on a pedestal. They still do. Unfortunately, Xi Jinping's moves to rejuvenate China could be considered a series of political missteps elsewhere in the world. For example, China wanted Taiwan under its rule, using force if deemed necessary. Democratic countries would then flock together to keep self-governing Taiwan free. Xi's foreign policies also had other countries on the defensive. China had successfully alienated its neighbors in its bid to claim the South China Sea. In his desire to reinstate a strong feeling of Chinese nationalism, Xi had also made the West believe that China regarded it as an enemy. Because of this, China and the Chinese people are being regarded with hostility on US soil. It's not just about the COVID pandemic, although that had become a factor and possibly an excuse for other people to lash out against China. Sadly, not only the Chinese Communist Party is experiencing this hostility. People had generalized China and its citizens. Xi should see this tense atmosphere as a possible deterrent to China's rise. Scholars who had been following Xi's rise, however, don't see flexibility in the Chinese president's leadership. It doesn't look like he would be adjusting his policies to please the Western world. A sign of Xi's inflexibility was its implementation of Plan A during the COVID lockdowns. The government was more than willing to continue the lockdown and disrupt people's lives, even when the science no longer supported the plan. The COVID lockdowns also showed just how afraid people were to question Xi Jinping. They may not agree with him, but they would be too afraid to say anything. They had no choice but to follow the rules that were being implemented. Their leader might have had so many moves to fight corruption and alleviate poverty, but Xi was definitely not concerned about what other countries thought of him and China as a whole. So yes, Xi Jinping was able to provide China the great and powerful leader it was hoping for. He was able to make several important changes within a short period of time, just like Mao Zedong did. But knowing your power and believing yourself above the rest could be a problem in itself. Because Xi is aware of people's comparisons between him and Mao, he's no longer perceptive to criticism. A leader who disregards criticism no longer has a way up in terms of improvement, but may still be able to spread out, amassing more power. Some scholars believe that comparison isn't a problem in itself. It may be who Xi is being compared to that is a problem and a self-fulfilling disaster. Mao, after all, wasn't afraid of the body count to get his goals. So, some may wonder why Xi Jinping is not using his energies to become more like Deng Xiaoping. At least, Deng Xiaoping gave China a chance to become wealthy. Deng Xiaoping opened the country to the world. The economic reform he proposed still has an influence today. In a way, Xi Jinping still follows in Deng Xiaoping's legacy, but you won't hear a lot of people comparing him to Deng. Everyone wants a trailblazer, even one who's destructive. They want in-your-face power, one that is good for nationalism and standing their ground against the Western world. When Xi Jinping began his unprecedented third term as the president of China, more people began paying attention. His longevity is placed alongside Mao's 27 years of leadership, which only ended when he died in 1976. Some worry that Xi Jinping has successfully eradicated the checks and balances in the party. His leadership felt largely unopposed. It is wildly believed that anyone who speaks badly of Xi Jinping will meet some kind of trouble, to put it mildly. Power. Xi Jinping is undoubtedly accumulating more of it, and the world is noticing. It's not just an international thing either, with the party members being inwardly policed. Nobody dares say anything against Xi. Nothing is accidental. He knows what he's doing and has surrounded himself with loyal, younger officials he has handpicked for his teams. The handpicking part certainly resulted in loyalty. Why would these young men go against the person who chose them when it was already clear from the start that it would be dangerous to do so anyway? The power growing from the ashes, catapulting Xi Jinping to greater heights his predecessors didn't even achieve during their terms, was said to be from Mao Zedong. Who was Mao again? Yes, let's get back to this question. After all, there were other great Chinese leaders that Xi Jinping could have aspired to become. Mao Zedong was dubbed as the Great Helmsman. He was believed to have reshaped China. It was no surprise that people followed him because he was a revolutionary and visionary. After all, that was what people were looking for in a leader. However, Mao was more. He was considered omnipotent, followed and obeyed even when he initiated projects that could destroy individuals and organizations and even the nation itself. That was how far gone most people were in following Xi Jinping. Biographer Philip Short called him an unquestioned leader, and he emphasized the fact that Mao had power over almost a quarter of all mankind, given how vast China is and how populated it was. Right now, even as Xi Jinping claims his third term, some people are still wondering what kind of leader he will eventually become on his own terms. Will he be known for raising China with several casualties in his wake? Will he be a transformational leader? Will he eventually become more flexible and open China to the rest of the world? Or will he continue on his path to becoming more like Mao? In China, it's not clear-cut. Some people still praise Mao for his legacy. It's not just about being what the West considers as a mass murderer. For them, he was a hero. Mao's supporters revered him for the following: raising life expectancy in China, creating stability and unity in a country that was otherwise constantly invaded by foreigners and troubled by civil wars, massive land reform, raising women's status, improving literacy, developing the country's infrastructure and industry. These sound like good things, and for those that these improvements favored, it was clear that they would want another Mao in Xi Jinping. Not everyone was blinded by the good, and they couldn't see the bad though. There was an undercurrent of rebellion in China, silent people who didn't accept everything Mao had to offer. But there was fear too. Fear kept them silent. Today we have Xi Jinping holding on to power with his own brand of ruthlessness. The kind that would use nationalism as an excuse to take hold of China's neighboring territories. The kind that would hide accurate information that would put him and his country in a bad light. And the kind that believed in power over lives. There's still so much hidden from the public, and that's what's dangerous about leaders who believe in their own power. Perhaps the comparison isn't fair. Perhaps Xi isn't a monster like Mao is in terms of death toll. However, he is a fire that could become uncontained, fueled by his own declarations of infallibility. The thing is, Xi revels in the Mao comparison. It doesn't mean it's true though. But what is true is that he holds a lot of power. The third term is proof that he will hold on to it for as much as he can. His wild and narcissistic decisions, unchecked by the Communist Party, also make him volatile. He could completely go his own way. Yes, China is not a democracy, but it still somehow attempts to have checks and balances. Once he thinks he's above those, there will be a lot more trouble, and it's already showing that he's edging away from the party's control. Still, does it mean he's like Mao? In terms of significance, he may have solidified himself enough to make it to the history books. But the comparison is not perfect. He may have gained power and significance. He may have shown some hubris and incompetence leading to deaths. However, Xi Jinping seems to still be in touch with what China needs, focusing on improving its economy and strengthening its nationalism. His story is not over though. The Mao comparison can become a self-fulfilling prophecy for better or for worse. The world awaits with its breath held. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up sign and subscribe to our channel. I hope to see you'll join us again for our next video. Make sure to click the notification bell to stay updated.